Welcome to the Brothers and Books Podcast. Read all day Brothers and Books Podcast by Hyatt.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Brothers and Books podcast as a part of the world's coolest book club. My name is Dylan Conway and today I'll be speaking to Anthony Harry Moffitt. Anthony, or Harry as he's preferred to be called, is the author of 11 Bats. He's served an extended time in the Australian Army, including 11 deployments with the Special Air Service Regiment, making him one of the longest serving soldiers within that specific Special Forces Operations Unit. He's also a psychologist and a consultant at the Stoughton Group, a lover of cricket, and above all else, a family man and a man of morals. Today we'll be speaking about the Afghanistan withdrawal and his thoughts on it, his life leading up to writing the book and how he went about writing the book itself. We'll speak about some of the incidents that occurred during his deployments overseas, including a mass casualty scenario. And of course, we'll finish with some of Harry's recommended reads to either assist you increase and enhance the well-being of your life, but also if you're looking to attend Special Forces selection or endeavor on an adventure of your own, he'll also provide some book recommendations. I hope you enjoyed this episode and this conversation with Harry like I did, and as always, make sure you like and subscribe this video or podcast if you're listening to it by those means. Thanks for being a part of the world's coolest book club. This is Brothers and Books, episode 4. Harry Moffitt, thank you for joining me today. How are you, mate?
Good, Dylan. Thanks for having us on.
No, it's my pleasure, my absolute pleasure. Now, Harry, you've written your book, 11 Bats. When was it released? So it was released last year before?
And Christmas 2021, yeah.
Okay, perfect. And I've read it. I've listened to the audiobook, mate. For anybody listening that's read the book, do you just want to give us an update on what it was like writing? Obviously, it covers a lot of time, and it's a relatively larger book. But I know from reading all the reviews, I know I just mentioned before we went live about Audible and how many great comments it's got. Do you just want to run us through what it was like to put your life and one hell of a life down on paper, and still going, obviously, but how that was and how the book's going now?
Yeah, well, look, firstly, I'm just grateful that it's been well received and, relieved, as I think I said to you. I've had a lot of sleepless nights, not so much writing it because I really enjoyed that, but particularly around the release. But look, writing the book was something, it's one of those things I think most of us have, kind of dabble with or dalliance with in our minds. And I never really thought I'd do it, but I was a mad journal keeper. I have been probably since high school, to be fair. And it's not always your classic neat handwritten journal, but and whilst I was in the military, I had these collection of green army notebooks, and then the yellow ones, and then big brown notebooks, and just bits of paper and etchings, even OP logs and whatnot. So they're sitting upstairs. There's a whole army trunk full of them. And so I've always been a writer, and I've always understood that logging and writing down your thoughts is good for you. But it wasn't until the 11 Bats presentation went to first the Australian War Museum and then to the Shrine here in Melbourne, and I found this mad military historian nerd who just went, "Oh, we got to get the bats up," and the bats went up, and they were on display for 6 months. It was brilliant. I absolutely loved it. I was doing little kind of ad hoc tours through there and talking about the cricket bats. And it was around that time publishers came to me and said, "Oh, have you thought about putting the bats into a book?" And I had, but I hadn't really given it serious thought. And then Tom Gilliott from Allen and Unwin flew down, got me drunk at the Kelvin Club, and kind of pushed me through. And he introduced me to a guy named Malcolm Knox, who is a great cricket writer. And I've been reading Malcolm's pieces in the Australian and various other papers for years as I watched Test match cricket. And that's how we kicked it off. And I submitted, the biggest journal that I wrote, I suppose, kind of going back to where the process started. When I finished my time at the regiment in 2015, or when I finished my time, in 2013, when I finished my time on the tools and hung my helmet up, so to speak, I said to Danielle, look, I'm thinking about going away to watch the Ashes and just, having a circuit breaker kind of time away by myself. And we've travelled a lot to England. So I went to England. I took a room above a pub called the Bull Inn in a place called Wargrave, of all bloody names to pick. And I spent that summer in England writing the biggest journal of my life. I just documented story after story. I went through photos. I took, screenshots and whatnot of all of my journals and some of them actual journals. And I just vomited out what ended up being about 250,000 words. And I had them all in order, and it was in good order. Watched a lot of test match cricket, drank a lot of beer, had an absolute ball walking through the countryside and rambling, as they call it. And that was the precursor to the book. And through that process, I found I loved writing. It was such not only a therapeutic thing to do, to write and get what's inside you out onto a page in a coherent fashion. But I actually like the process, getting up every morning at 5, go for a walk, get back, fuel up on coffee, and just hit the typewriter the laptop for some days 6-8 hours. I just get lost in it. So, and the final part of your question, what's it like to put your life on in a book? Well, it's actually tougher than you think. A lot of the sleepless nights I've had around is sharing discussions I've had and questions and people probing kind of deeper around things. I have a sense that when people read the book, they think I've held back a bit in parts, and which some parts deliberately so because it's OPSEC or has a confidentiality around it, but some other parts are quite personal. So it has been challenging. I've read it again. I read it about 10 times when we were editing it. But I've read it again, and there's a lot I'd change, which is strange. So not change because I'd take it out. As I think I'd add bits in. There's bits I think I should have said more there, and I could have said more. But I've loved it, and I'm going to do it again. I've started another one, and I don't know when that'll end up. But I just got to get to England to wash the Ashes.
Well, that was going to be my second question. But then you've answered another question to be like, it might be just another excuse to go across to the Ashes. But I'm glad that you said that there was some difficulty to it, because the first part of your response talking about, waking up, going for a walk, banging in the coffee, and then writing for 8 hours, I'm sure there might be a few authors out there listening to this like, oh, shut up, mate. It's way harder than that. Yeah. But what I think... your book is very unique. Now, there's obviously a lot of different authors and different military historians and different soldiers who have served in wars, less obviously within the special forces units. But your book is very unique because of that tie to cricket throughout. Now, when you first, I can't remember the first bat in Afghanistan 2002, and please feel free to correct me. Did you take that over with you? I can't remember. Did you take that over with you originally?
No, that's the Shahid Afridi Asadabad bat. And you might remember Shahid Afridi was caught on television with like 2 billion viewers watching Pakistan. I think it was via Australia, biting a cricket ball. It's taking tampering to up until that stage, a higher level. But so the first bat, we were sitting around in Asadabad, and as you well know, Dylan, a lot of soldiering's quite mundane and sitting around, either planning, preparing, sleeping, just goofing off.
Oh, I don't know what you SAS boys, but it's not like that for me, mate. No, you're right. There's a lot of downtime. Yeah.
No, but it's the same. It's the same in the SAS, mate. Don't believe all the Hollywood. I've been on deployments where it's just breakneck speed, gig after gig after gig. But there is still a lot of dry holes, a lot of sitting around. So you don't get a HVT every gig you go out on. Very, very few and far between. So. And we were sitting around Asadabad, and we were providing some Overwatch capability for the US SOF that were there. I think the SEALs and others from Bragg were there. and the CIA were there up in a little kind of compound, locked themselves down in the bottom of a valley, and they'd go out and we'd do tasks at night and whatnot on the border. And a lot of our missions got cancelled for various reasons. The targets didn't roll up, or they were still found to be in Pakistan or wherever. And so there was days on end there where we're sitting around going, what are we going to do? And our interpreter at the time, or the interpreter that was at the compound, John, as he was known, they seem to all be called John in those environments. We talked to him, and he agreed to go duck across the border into Pakistan. Remember, this is sad about up northern Afghanistan, so he's going over into the Waziri kind of areas, tribal areas, and got us a bat. And he brought this bat back, and it was the worst bat ever. You would never hit a cricket ball with it because it would just smash into bloody matchsticks. But it suited us perfectly, and we played a lot of cricket with the locals, and so that was the very first bat. And at that stage, I had everyone sign the bat when we left our first deployment. I think we were there for maybe 6 months or something, 5 or 6 months. And I had no idea I was going to do anything with it. Just came and sat in a box for the next 20 years,
Well, I just think it's brilliant that it came to be. Now, obviously, John, the interpreter, risked his life to get what you're telling me now is a horrible conditioned bat. But I think, it's crazy. You must be in awe. And I know you talk about imposter syndrome in the book, but you must be in awe that the bats that you collected and got signed by all the, meaningful people from your deployment, and people that had an impact on the deployment. And you just continued that, and with consistency, it became obviously the blueprint and sort of structure of all of your stories for the books. And I think that's great. And it talks about, I guess for me, it's like a show of consistency, where if you do something, you continue to maintain, this will mean something possibly to me in one day. If it doesn't, but I'm going to do it anyway. I think that's great that it's turned out the way it has. And obviously the 11 bats on display, I saw a photo. They look magnificent, and it's such a
Thanks,
great
mate.
bit of war memorabilia, mate, isn't it?
And
And it's so unique.
I reckon. Look, again, I'm always in danger of sounding boastful, but I get so excited about this stuff. I'm not too old to get super excited still, but I would humbly offer that they're the artifact of the last 20 years. So just very high level, without even dialing into the people and characters on them. They cover Afghanistan, Timor, and Iraq, that the big three, as we've all been involved in to some degree over this period, certainly an emotional involvement. And it covers the period, I suppose, the sustained period from 2001 through. I left the unit in 2016, but I didn't leave defence. I finished in 2019 in defence full time. So I think they kind of embody that. And on those signatures are not just operators; they're our support staff. They're the people that we work with. We work with civilians, with interpreters. There's even prime ministers and all these other politicians and VIPs, I suppose you'd call them, and protagonists and antagonists. So it's a big collection of individuals. So I agree with you, mate. I just ham-fistedly almost, I just serendipitously collected this collection of bats, and they do really umbrella the whole period in every way.
Yeah, and now obviously because of the high tempo unit that you're in the time frame that it was, the 11 bats, 11 deployments. I just think it's brilliant. And I think as well, when reading your book, what I thought was different and what would set up a lot of soldiers for success, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, but I really liked the book because now obviously it takes a lot of time and effort to maintain your capability within a special forces unit. But you had something outside of the unit. Now, a lot of people have family, but that's often cut away. Now, I know that you're a father as well, and I know you did your absolute best throughout this period of long isolation periods away from your family to bring them in. But you had something that you could take with you, an interest, obviously sport, obviously cricket, with you on all these deployments to keep keep you sane, mate. And I think that's really good as well, because a lot of the young lads, they don't have something like that outside of the military.
Yeah, look, I was just back in Perth last week, and getting, now that it's kind of opened up and we can get access, but I spend some time talking to the new guys, and even people who are in the unit and looking for mentoring, etc. I had the same conversation every time. Buy a shit car. Work on your relationship. Prioritize your relationships always, but be deliberate about them rather than passive. But too many of us are passive in our relationships. And buy a house, any house, just do it tomorrow, get it done quickly. It's all relative in the end, at the end game. But have a third thing, and I think you've probably heard me talk about that before. And it's not an uncommon thing. There's other people, lots of people talk about. But that third thing is not work, and it's not family. It's where you can go and have your identity. It's where I can go and be Moff or Anthony. No one calls me Anthony anymore, but they used to call me Tony or Moff. And it's away from my military mates. It's away from my family, and I can be, no one different, but I can just have a different habitat to be in. And I found that when I left Perth to come here, and I was posted to DFR for a period, which was difficult, really, really hard. I found it so bloody hard to be back in normal army, and really challenging. And through that period, just that network of civvy mates was something I really leaned into, and it didn't really strike me how powerful it was and how well it had equipped me for change until that period. So my advice to anyone listening is, if you don't have a third or fourth or fifth, whatever it is, some people go surfing or read books is a great way. I've got my old man chair in the corner there, and love to sit back and read and whatnot, but certainly have something away from defence or your work and your family. It's okay to be selfish sometimes. It's good for you.
I laugh at you saying my old man chair, and obviously I mentioned the message earlier, one of your mates calling you old. I don't even think you're that old, Harry. I don't think you're that old at all.
I'm pretty old.
I don't know.
In a rough life. Yeah.
Mate, so your father is from Chinchilla. I've actually got family from Chinchilla, and within your book, the growing up phase is obviously a big part of it. And something that stood out to me, obviously, is not only you were identified pretty early on to be pretty intellectually gifted, for lack of a better word, now all those years ago as a young fella.
I got that wrong.
As a young fella. But I don't want to give too much away about the book if you haven't read it yet. But facing bullies as a kid, and how that set you up, I just noticed this adversity, and there's a common theme of people turning it into a strength. Now, you mentioned in your book that you had to face down bullies time and time again. Do you want to talk about that a bit before we go into the first deployment?
Yeah, look on bullies. I will travel anywhere, anytime to face bullies head on. It's kind of what our life of service is about, isn't it? About protecting vulnerable people against assholes and bullies. In high school, I was somehow snuck through the filter to go onto an accelerated education program, and that just raised us all above and it was a Star Wars bar kind of class. There was very fat and skinny, tall and short, and all manner of things. And some of the guys were in there were physically disabled as well. It's a really inclusive kind of course, and it was a pilot. And so we were just as open slather. And I found myself, probably through playing football and sport, I was not too bad at it. There's a few of us that ended up being, I suppose, the default defence for some of these people. I don't mind saying that, because it was a pretty tough period, and I'd get flogged once a week. Somewhere in a change room, or at lunchtime, or I'd be ordered to march out to the quarry next door and cop a bit of a slapping around. and or even on the bus, brazenly in front of teachers, and just kind of stand there and watch and go, oh, break it up, But so it did make me tough, and in fact, I'm not saying I'm taking on any world champions or anything, but I learned how to fight, and I didn't win them all, but I learned how to stand there and earn respect, and I think I did. I like to think I did eventually. But yeah, mate, it's heinous. And what it does to the majority of people, and it did to me, it just buggers your self confidence. It puts you into a constant state of anxiety, and I've been anxious ever since. I've had to kind of overcompensate at times just to get by, but. It even makes me a bit depressed now thinking back about it, and I look at others. Both my kids copped a bit at school, nothing to that extent, but it does bring the inner defiance and inner kind of warrior, I guess, schoolyard warrior to that extent. But I think I like to reframe all of that in my own mind. It's something we can all do. We all reframe things. I feel that I was just lucky enough to kind of reframe that into a positive for me and make me feel stronger, and I used to think I can stand up to these guys. I might not win, but I'm not afraid to stand here and stand up to them. And I think that held me in good stead. Going back to your point.
Well, so sorry, Harry, I'm just having a computer issue. But what I was just going to say is you don't speak about it much in the book. I know there's maybe a chapter or maybe not even a full chapter, but Kapuka, obviously, you speak about, and it sounds like you did a bloody good job at Kapuka. You then posted up to Townsville and ended up being a signaller for Mild Unit 1 area. But the selection process, it's you're in a unique position where you obviously have the qualification of a psychologist. You are a psychologist, and doing selection. Looking back on that now, like what held you in good stead? What were the hardest parts? And what was something that you held your head up high about the actual selection process itself? Because still every year, there's a lot of advice and information on selection, but there's a lot of people that still can't get through it. So what would you say that's something that really helped you through Special Forces selection?
Yeah, well, a few things. A couple of really big ones. I spent a lot of time. I was happy in my own. I was in my own company. I spent a lot of time solo up in the hills around Roleystone. My parents, after they got back together for a short period, were living up there. So that was really beneficial. Just chucking a pack on, map to ground, compass. One of the things that probably not a lot of people are aware of is on selection still today. The majority. It's not the majority, but the largest percentage of loss or attrition happens during Happy Wanderer, which is a solo trek for 5 days wherever they choose to run. I think it's back at the Stirling Ranges now. And I think the solo thing, when you're really fatigued, that's 10 days-ish into the course or more, super fatigued, I think everything amplifies as a problem, and if you got no one to kind of reflect on that does people's heads in, frankly. I think and it's something I've always wondered about. It's a bit of a phenomena that solo, can you do the solo piece? So I broached that. I did a lot of reading, mate. When I first saw the black and white image of 22 SAS bursting into the Iranian embassy on the newspapers and on the telly at home, that was an inflection point that actually set off a trigger in me to read. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but I was so hungry for knowledge. I wondered, what are they? What are they doing? Who is this SAS stuff? And what are they? And I found the Israelis, and I found the French and the Germans and the US, and then Australians. There was no Australian SF stuff around at that time. It's kind of part of the reason behind the book too, because there's not a great deal out there on selection and getting through all that stuff. So, but look, I think the big thing for me getting into selection was just preparation. I know it's boring, but I prepared out the yin yang, and I'd come across this book by Percy Cerity, How to Run, I think it was called. I don't have it anymore. It's just one of those books that went by the wayside. It was like How to Run or Run Like a Lion or something like that. He was a bit of an eccentric old dude. And mate, he talked about some amazing things that blew my mind. He talked about getting fit, no shit. He talked about the mind. It was kind of my introduction to the first time I'd really even thought about the mind. I'm like 17, 18 years old. What 17-year-old thinks about their mind?
Oh, yeah, they
Probably
don't.
none. And so I thought, fuck, that's amazing. I'm thinking like this. That must be, and he was completely wrong, but it didn't matter. It was folk psychology, but it was perfect. It was just what I needed. So I understood about grit and resilience before they were even a buzzword. And I understood about social interaction. He was really big on doing things in groups and teams, and he talked about teaming and having people and sharing. He talked about art, literature, reading, poetry. And I just thought, this guy's blowing my mind. Not sure I'm into all of it, but that really the combination of the reading and the preparation that I took super seriously. I think that was what gave me the foundations. And these days they've got training programs that I think still could do with tweaking, but I went on really confident. I went on super confident that I was going to finish it. Whether I passed was kind of up to the DS at the end of the day. And this, again, I'm in danger of sounding boastful, but I get excited. But I actually reflect on selection and enjoyed it. And when I say enjoyed it, I didn't enjoy it like a night on the grog with the boys or an Ashes win or something. I enjoyed it because I was meeting the challenge. Like I felt like I was competently meeting the challenge, and I was a bit off over here. Only did X amount of chin ups, and I might have been slow at a checkpoint here and there. And my nav might have been off one night, but I felt like I was there or thereabouts. I felt like I was in the game the whole time.
I love. You've answered that question beautifully as far as Brothers and Books is concerned, obviously, as a mission. There you go. From Harry himself, read more books to set up for selection and anything else that you do in your life. And you talk about preparation throughout your book, and I couldn't agree more. But what I was going to say is, firstly, I have to ask the token question, what was the hardest part of selection? But the second thing I was going to say, and there's a lot of adaptations to this quote, but and you mentioned it there, the reason that I think that people look back on fondly of hard times is because no one ever talks about the times that they had it easy. You know what I mean? And I used to, my old soldiers might say this is true or not. In my mind, it happened. But, whenever you've got a big event coming up, you're not going to be spending your time at the pub after talking about the time I gave you a smoke break or you got to sleep for a couple of extra hours. You're going to talk about the time we had to do something shithouse. Speaking of, worst part of selection for yourself as a young man.
Yeah, look, I don't really. The thing that sticks out the most, I'm sure there was others, but the thing that stuck out the most, so I had to do the 3.2 again because a few guys didn't make the mark the first time, and unbelievably, a lot of them passed the second time. I'm still working that out, but having to run it with them, I felt, mate, fair income, they're not up for it. Why do we have to go and do it again? I remember being a bit peeved around that. Sharing a sleeping bag on Lucky Dip. I think it was the last night I shared a sleeping bag that had come out of the water with Ken Studley. It was about -2, I reckon, that night. And we barely fitted in there. And I think he farted within the first 10 seconds of getting into it. We knew we wouldn't be in there for long anyway. But again, I was uber focused. It was the first time, probably Kapuka was the first time I found this focus. I found this competence and comfort in that, I suppose, competence or comfort in discomfort almost. And it was a thing. And so throughout selection, I felt like, as I said to you, enjoyment's not the right word, but I took comfort in the fact that I felt like I was hitting the marks.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And
but I did fail selection. I talk about it in the book, and I failed. We got out on the road and they said, okay, everyone line up. There was about 50 or 40 of us left or something, and they ended up being 20 or 22, I think there was. And they called out and said, if your name's called out, go into the bar, you've passed. If it's not called out, get on the bus, pack your stuff up, get on the bus, you're going back to Perth. And that was your debrief. You never got any psych debriefs or physical debriefs or anything like that. And they called out the names of mine. I'm standing beside Andy Constantinides. He died in the Black Hawk accident, unfortunately, but he and I became kind of pretty close mates. And neither of our names were called out, and we felt like we'd hit it. We felt, what do you mean? And we were devastated. I was crying. He was comforting me. We were sitting on the bunks, and then over the tannoy, about 30 or more minutes later, there was Moffitt and Constantinides come to the wing sergeant major's office, and we went, we've passed. They fucked it up, and we had, because the sly pricks at SIG Corps had slid our name in under a ECN for SIGs, so they could swell their numbers. And I remember Toff, I'm pretty sure it was Terry O'Farrell, sitting there, and he just went, he said, "You blokes want to be grunts?" And we went, "Fuck yeah!" So that was it. So I know what it feels like to fail and to pass at the same time.
Because when I was reading that segment of your book, I was like, "Oh, this isn't some sort of extra test. It was just they stuffed it up." Because you definitely deserve to pass from everything I read and everything you've said this morning. So that would have been the piece before the storm. I could imagine not hearing your name, because you said it was alphabetical order and they didn't mention it. I would have been dirty, mate.
I know. Well, so Andy was from SIGs as well, and I was from SIGs, and there was a bit of mafioso going on in those days. 152 squadron used to be, SIG squadron used to be almost all berets, and they had a Cat A and a Cat B pass type of thing. And so what does that mean? It means that you pass selection to a suitable standard, but you don't go on to the Rio cycle and become an operator. You go into the SIG. You do basic courses. It's a lot different now, but back in those days, and it was and anyone could avail themselves of that. Vehicle mechanics, engineers, etc. Everybody, anyone in the unit. And it used to be a unit almost full of all berets, So there was a bit of mafiosa and pea and thimble tricks going on to move, some of the support staff off the course into the Cat B. But anyway, it all worked out. All's well that ends.
So Harry, so after you were selected, you took a hiatus from the military. You got the call up either just post 9/11 in the early 2000s. Like I said, please correct me if I'm wrong. And now you deployed to Afghanistan in 2002, and now history travels quickly to the thinking mind that has to see media on the night news every day. But so Australia was deployed to Afghanistan in 2002. Prior to the Iraq invasion, and it was just your unit. Is that correct? What was the operational theatre like in 2002 and Australia's support to it?
Yeah, it was pretty much just SAS with detachments and a small headquarters. I'm probably doing some injustices there, I'm sure, movements and whatever. But it was more of, so I think one squadron were the first to deploy in 2001, weeks after the towers went down. And it was, just a squadron heavy is the way I would do it. And it was exciting, of course. It was purposeful. We were going after Osama bin Laden. We had a protagonist, who we saw nightly, daily, and that was clear and explicit target. So our job was to support US Rangers, Marines, and other US SOF in the northeast areas up around Tora Bora and Ali Keel and those kinds of places in the tunnel systems up there where he was reported, or his henchmen were reported to be. And also at that stage too, a lot of the fighting had kicked the Taliban back to that corner of Afghanistan and over the border into Pakistan. So there was it was winning. We were winning. I think it's fair to say not many wars you can kind of put your hand on your heart and say we're beating the opposition. So that was our role, and a lot of the role up there was long, hard days, nights, weeks in the mountains, overwatch, doing our classic clandestine reconnaissance work. We also did a lot of vehicle-mounted work as well out on the roads and around the Parrot's Beak, the Khyber Pass, as it's kind of been come to know, and out on the border. So it was really classic SAS stuff, and the unit was we were all around each other. It was probably the tightest I've seen the unit ever. In the whole time I've been there, very close, real brotherhood, if you like, and doing meaningful work. And so it was I reflect back really kindly. It's a pity we pivoted and got distracted in Iraq.
And that's what I was going to say. Now, excuse the pronunciation. So, Waziristan over the Pakistan border, obviously, was like a big highway for the movement in and out of Taliban, Al Qaeda, and it was heavily bombed under Barack Obama, etc. But what was the feeling of like the unit? Now, you said that you were decisively winning and you were getting the feedback to obviously say that. You wouldn't say that unless it was, known. I think I know you after reading your book. What was sort of the feeling once we decided to step away from Afghanistan in those early days by the unit before obviously reorientating towards Iraq?
Oh, we knew it was a mistake then. Yeah, and they weren't. I remember Bush and the Bush administration talking it down. They were still trying to get numbers at the United Nations to pass a resolution to invade with authority. The no-fly zone arguably was doing the job, but they were just finishing some family business, I think. In all honesty, did they need to go? I don't know. It seemed to me not, and I would think history kind of supports that. However, they did. I remember flying in and out of the airbase there in UAE. Anyway, flying in and out and just seeing hundreds of Apache aircraft wrapped in plastic, like still in the plastic, folded up, wings and long along the body and blades along the body, and seeing just hardware. It was unbelievable. And we knew then that they were getting ready for an Iraq. Lots of tanks and lots of armored vehicles and whatnot. And we were remiss because we thought we've got them on the run here into Waziristan, as you said, the federated states of northern Pakistan there, that Wild West. And that's a good place for them to be. They're a known quantity, and you can kind of ring fence that and then get about installing a decent government in Afghanistan or allowing Afghanistan to do what it needs to do. But we kind of knew that it might not, at that stage we were talking openly about this is not a good idea. And it wasn't, because we got distracted from memory. They only left a couple of few thousand or not even 10,000 troops and observers and whatnot in Afghanistan, and the Taliban came back with force, and this time with a new mission.
Yeah, and I think it's super interesting because that's not a perspective that's often talked about. A lot of the time, the general population can't even remember that far back to know that that's what we were there doing back in 2002 before Iraq. So, what could have been maybe. I know that's not talked about a lot in the, the strategic space, but it does sound as if you guys were doing good work, and we did have them on the run, but got a bit distracted.
What it does highlight, Dylan, and you're right, what it highlights to me is that, Afghanistan is an impossible place to conquer, and I think that's what we ended up trying to do. Occupation in places like that's just a poor. I thought we learned our lesson in Vietnam and other places, but at that end of the war, I think keeping it special ops was absolutely the right way to do it. And so what does that mean? Okay, we probably needed to increase the number of special operations capabilities and people, and fragment it a little, just so but leave the DNA of how special ops works when it's left to its own device. And in the long run, if you look historically over Afghanistan, once you've got the defence industrial complex involved, they make no money out of special operations forces, because special ops wear runners, jeans, pack of rollies and buy their own fruit from the internet. So for their guns, so that doesn't make any money for the big military defense industry. But what does is boots, teeth, dentists, food, all that kind of stuff. So I think when we went back in 2005, we also could see it was going to be big. And I think once it's big, you start pissing off the population, which we did. And, and some of those internally were just kind of latent Taliban, Al-Qaeda sympathisers or were nationals who were pissed off. And over time, I think we saw last year what the end result was. We got handed our bums and handed our papers and told to fuck off.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting the part in your book, and I don't want to give it too much of your book away for those listening that haven't read it. If you haven't read it, 11 Bats by Harry Moffitt, go check it out. But really early on in that deployment, you ran into a CIA agent that you were working with on the ground, and he sort of called the war back in 2002 when talking about the reason why Taliban are fighting and what we were fighting against. Do you want to just talk about that, noting it was a component of your book and with everything that happened with the Afghanistan withdrawal?
Oh, no worries. They're happy to give away as much of the book as you want. But I mean, I certainly don't. I'm not going to make millions out of selling books, mate. So if people want to buy it, go for it. If not, I'm not offended. But yeah, I met a guy again named John. He was I think it was Anaconda, I'm pretty sure, or what became Anaconda or changed from Anaconda. It was based at, I think it's the bottom of the Cod Valley in Daikundai province. But yeah, he just said, he said, we'll never win this war, and it wasn't like a Hollywood movie where I said, do you reckon we'll ever win this war, Johnny? But and he was making the point that unless, I think the terminology I can paraphrase was that we'll never win this war unless we take the gloves off. And I quizzed him on what that meant, and he said, well, we need to bomb this whole valley because they live here. It's their home. That's where we can't get rid of them. This is the whole point. And by them, he meant, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, anti-coalition forces type. And he made the judgment, that we'll just end up pissing them off and, recall back to Vietnam. And I thought that was a really poignant moment, and particularly for a naive mind. I was, whilst I felt I was worldly and well-read and all the rest of it, there's an element of your first time in a conflict zone, which that was for me, or not first time, but early in your career, where you're still a bit naive to the deep politics. We're sold something, not sold, where we get our intelligence briefs from the ADF and we do very well. Australia's very credible, but it gives you an underpinning for your mission and for your area of operation. But you have to go do your own homework on the deeper politics. And I suppose watching that unfold in front of me was really interesting. And, I think in the long term, John was right,
And I thought it was unfortunate. Now, obviously, there'll be heaps of reports being spun up, reports that have already been done and concluded on the Afghanistan withdrawal and the war itself. But what I thought was disappointing, obviously, noting the time frame of world events once that did occur, that it didn't really get the magnifying glass it deserved, similar to probably Iraq and Vietnam as well. So in my opinion, obviously, it's just a bit of a shame that, fingers crossed we learn from this is all. Do you think that we will?
Yeah, probably not. I think that the greater drivers of defence is to follow the money. I think that the defence industry, it is what it is, and I'm certainly not making criticism of the people in it, but it's such an unwieldy beast, and there's and some big players who have got big interests in driving profits. I think they'll always be at the edges backing themselves, backing self-interest. So I think that they're a big driver in war. You go back thousands of years, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Yeah.
I think Afghanistan the withdrawal was unfortunate, but look, it's hard. I sit squarely on the fence on the withdrawal out of Afghanistan because there's no good way to end a war, is there? In a lot of ways, I kind of reflect and think it wasn't that bad, because how do you end a war? You don't kind of well, thanks guys, it's been good fun, and throw them the keys to the front door. It's there's no good way, and it's unfortunate. And around the timing, the 20-year anniversary, and all those types of things elicited a lot of emotions, I'm sure, for a lot of people. But I think we've still got. I think people need to have their downtime and then get back on the tools. There's still so much you can be doing to help Afghanistan right now, and we've been doing. My wife and I have been helping people who've been doing a lion's share of work getting people out of Afghanistan, settling them here. My wife drops off, takes young women to get their medical checkups and all that kind of stuff around Melbourne. So there's still plenty you can be doing. You don't have to sit on your woes and soothe your sorrows through the empty bottom of a stubby anymore. Just jump up, get to the gym and get fit, and come and bloody lean in. And there's still lots you can do.
Now, Harry, we're talking about. Mentioned emotional response, which is the second thing I want to talk to you. Now, obviously, another big part of your life is the study you did to become a psychologist. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, your work in your later years within the military was human performance. Now, obviously, you're a man with a thick book with some interesting and crazy events and some life-changing events that you talk through in your book. What I'm interested to know is about some of these memories that stay with you, but also now with your medical credentials as a psychologist, your thoughts on them and your advice to others going through severe adversity, whether it be losing mates or coming close to death, and how you sort of shake out of that. Not to mention your extended period of time away in a war zone, and just whatever advice you have based off your actual experience and based off of what our university education system gives you the ability to say.
Yeah, look, I think it's pretty simple advice. If you're, there's kind of two populations here that I could speak to. There's the population that are struggling. If this is what you're going to, like kind of overcoming that adversity and maybe the hangover of their experiences. Is that kind of where you're going with this?
Yeah.
Dylan? Yeah. So processing extreme experiences. I kind of break people I work with or talk to up into kind of two things. Bit of a blunt instrument, but I found it works quite well. And that is someone who's trapped, mentally trapped, either anchored to an event or doesn't understand why they feel it. It might be a whole bunch of cut by death by 1,000 cuts for another person, but they're anchored and they can't get out. So that's kind of up to us, the people who have come through or who are functioning well, to almost get down and grab them and take them to the help they need. And because people, we're not no amount of Harry Moffitt on a podcast saying, "Oh, go for a walk each day and go out into nature and eat well, sleep well," and all the rest is going to get some people out of where they're at. So we've got to get down there and help them get themselves out, and that can be punishing, hard work. You can start to hate it after a while and become resentful, but that's the way out. And then helping them get back. The other people are kind of I suppose just locked in. They can help themselves. They are feeling down and the best thing you can do if you are having periods of struggle is book yourself in to go and see a psychologist or go and see a mental health expert. And you can break it down to these things: talk and write. And write down your feelings, talk to someone about what's going on for you. And that's the way to order the fragmented complex array of bits and pieces in your head into some kind of order. When you need to build your own story, and you do that by writing and talking. That's how we've done it for centuries. We did it for 100,000 years ago, sitting around the fire, telling stories, bringing things to order. That's what we do, and it's still, I think, the best. Talk therapy, even with a mate, is still our best methodology of dealing with those kind of deep issues. And then let's talk about the third group, or another group of people who want to be better, who want to perform, and they're preparing for something in life, like selection, or Danny Cooper just finished the Iditarod Trail, a good mate of mine, and he was in his preparation to go and do something post the regiment and later in life for whatever. If you want to improve yourself, same thing. Talk and write, order out your thoughts, because no one knows what's going on inside your brain. No one's got a clue what's going on inside our brain, our minds. I promise you, all of there's just theories and philosophies about it, which is fine. But that's our best method, I think. I agree with the people who would advocate that. And then if you want some inputs, listen and read and get yourself educated.
I think that's obviously it's professional advice from someone with a range of experience, but I think that's a really a great way to assess it. I think lots of times we feel as if there's a lot of complex issues. If we write down the individual issues on a page, it seems to sort of not nullify them, but take sort of the energy out of the stress that they bring us. Now, Harry, I know you actually, as a younger man, again, I still don't think you're old, but as a younger man,
I like you.
Oh yeah, well, your mates are no good to you, mate. I'll stick up for you.
So you reckon I'm young, but just had a hard life? You reckon?
It's just the hair. It's just the white hair. Now, so you actually took the piss out of a psychologist as a younger man coming back from deployment. Now, you were involved in a mass casualty scenario, and do you just want to run us through sort of that scenario, mate? Because I know from reading the book, and I could be wrong, it seemed like that was one of the situations where you were proper rocked, and rightly so.
Yeah, rock big time. Still impacts me when I think about it, and I do. So got to go through the bats and the years now. I think that was 2005. TK, we were the first team back to take over that Dutch camp, which had been evacuated, and it was G Troop 2 Squadron, I think, and we were sitting around the B huts there, just kind of tooling around on vehicles and weapons and whatnot, and a massive. This is TK, Tarankout, the base there. Massive explosion goes off in town, and within 15 minutes, buses, trucks full of dead and dying people. I think we had around 40 casualties that we treated that day, not to mention a dozen who had died, and then all the mothers and children, everyone who and the base was open. So they just kind of drove in, and all we had was a small medical facility, a couple of 11x11 size type tents with a rudimentary surgery capability. One doctor, a couple of US nurses, a couple of people come over from the Dutch thing, and it was horrendous. So I remember opening the door. One of the standout images. I remember opening the door to the bus, and just blood and small body parts rolling down the footwell and out onto the ground. It was they just chucked all these people, and what had happened was a suicide bomber, or I think there might have even been two. A suicide bomber had gone to a dogfight and cracked off, and it was a packed dogfight full of men and boys who were watching. It's a sport there, whether we agree with it or not. And killed a dozen odd. So we spent the day triaging, and the doctor, who was amazing on the day. He just said, "Mate, you there? You go and look after the guy, the people we can't help. Just make sure that they're okay during their final moments of life." So I was wetting lips and giving water and stuff. And I remember there was a young boy there. My son at that stage, Henry, was about 8 years old. This young fellow would have been about 12 or 13, a bit older. But I just become kind of anchored to him. I felt out of all these people laying in front of me, there's a dozen or a couple of dozen people laying in front of me just dying because we didn't have the capacity to help them, laying in the sun on concrete and dirt. I felt like he could be saved, So I think I kind of anchored myself to him, and that's the memory that kind of haunted me for quite a while. And I went to the psychologist, and there was just one moment in the number of psychology sessions that we had. There was just one moment, and I understand this now. Psychology is not about getting fixed every time you go there or getting better. There's just little moments in the 6 or 10 sessions that you do. And he said, don't you think he feels happy it would feel happy if he had a chance to come back here? He would thank you for being there for him while he was dying, and that, simple as it is. Because he was visiting me. I'd drive in the car and he'd pop into my head. I'd be washing myself in the shower. He'd pop into my head. It was doing my head in. It literally did my head in. And then I've learned over time to welcome him when he visits. He still does. I still drive along, not as often, but he'll pop into my head, or something on the radio will spark it. And I forced myself a little to smile and think that he was lucky that I was there to be with him, or not. He was lucky, but it was fortunate in that sense. So, but that was, I hope I answered your question there. Probably digressed.
No, definitely. I think what you said about psychology, and not every time that you have a psychological appointment will anything come from it, but it's those small moments. For those of you listening again who haven't read the book, that tragic incident, Harry goes into a lot of detail, and I thought something that was funny from that. Now, not that scenario. That scenario is horrible and tragic, but it'll finish up the story on a positive. Do you want to talk about what you and your mates used to do to the next bloke going to see the psychologist, where you'd stitch them up?
Right.
Yeah, a very funny part of the book off of this tragedy, which I think, you talk about reframing. You do find the light continuously throughout the book to bring a positive story from it as well.
Well, we, I don't advocate doing this, and the psychologists are much more wise to it now. But we were, this is an ongoing problem in defence that challenges defence, and I know they're working super hard to break down stigma. But we're still at this point in life where if you put your hand up and say I'm suffering with mentally and emotionally, there's still this risk that your career or even your reputation could be tarnished. And I think that's a lot of stigma, but there's some reality in that. And certainly in 2005, there's a lot of reality to that. You never want to be seen near the psych office. I was probably one of the first people to ever go there habitually, and I reckon the psychologists around the time would have been would agree with that. But so when we came out of when we were leaving TK, we went and did the psychological debriefing and whatnot, and it was a bit of a laugh that you would go in, have all your questions, name the things you'd seen and done. You're very compliant, and they're collecting data as well, and blah blah blah. But they'd say, "So, is there anything else you'd like to share? Are you suffering any illness?" Yeah, no, I'm fine. But you knew your mate Dylan was in next. He'd be sitting out the waiting room going, "Said, yeah, but I'm really worried about Dylan. He's been." He's been drinking a lot and talking about negative things, and I found him wandering around naked and crying the other night, and so I'm really worried about him, but I'm fine. So thanks very much, and off you go. And so the next old Dylan goes in and gets the extra 30, 40 minutes of. So it's funny, but it's not.
Oh yeah, and again, it was just the time period as well, right, where people weren't taking these things seriously. Now, Harry, I'm interested because now I know you're a very well-read individual, obviously. Some books that you've read in your life, mate, that now you've mentioned one already with the running book and your preparation for selection. But since then, the combination of your career as a psychologist, a human performance expert and coach, and also an extended career in the one of the best special forces operations units in the world. Some book recommendations for those listening today.
Yeah, well, the first thing I'll say is I love fiction books, and I don't think we talk about them enough. So there's some just some classics. Papillon was a book, Henry Charrier. If you want a kid's own adventure or man's own adventure, that's a pretty amazing book. So there's another book by Roland Griffiths Marsh, which is I Was Only 16. I was only 16, which is about Roland Griffiths Marsh. Joined up when he was 16 and went away to World War One. I mean, he was 22 and he'd been to World War Two. He was 22 when he returned from New Guinea after 4 or 5 years at war, and I love that book. There's a passage in it where the cart driver gets out and bangs his knob on the side of the wheel to shake off the drops, and gets back into the front, breaks open a sandwich and hands one to Roland Griffiths. He talks through how he felt. I'll just never ever forget it. Great stuff. And Charles Dickens' Great Expectation. I think that's the most read book I've had. And I'm a tragic rereader, Dylan. I probably aren't as well read as I'd like to be. I've got heaps of books sitting over there for the next iteration that I kind of get 100 pages into and go, it hasn't grabbed me, and I'll put to the side. But I reread a lot. In terms of performance books, I guess really I turn to literature and I turn to research more these days. I'm really interested in the research and the science of biology and psychology and sociology. But I love anything by Alain de Botton in terms of emotion and psychological prep. The School of Life, it's a little bit boring for me. This is what I'm reading at the moment. I'm just about to knock it off. It's a little bit boring for me because it's a rehash a lot of his old stuff. He wrote a book years ago called The Consolations of Philosophy, which I think have a lot more to do with social and just cognitive and social psychology. So I really like his stuff. Rereading on Combat by Grossman. I like that. It's not very well written, and it can be a bit like chewing cardboard at times, but it's a fantastic compendium of human performance from woe to go. It works from toenails to head, the top of your head, all the way through the human system. It really dives down on parasympathetic, on the central nervous system and all the various nervous systems and components, and goes to nutrition, sleep, etc. I still think it's a great read. I could go on. Anti-Fragile's probably right up there on top of the list by Nassim Taleb. You can open that at any page and have your mind blown. I think he'd be a bit of a dickhead and you might not enjoy having a beer with him. I'd love to prove that wrong. In fact, knowing him, it'd probably be a steak and a Syria from a Shiraz or something from Lebanon. But I love that book. It's just amazing, and it's got some great concepts on complexity and systems thinking. Where do I go? They're probably the big ones that launch out. I didn't want to kind of come across with a list because
no. Yeah. You didn't even have it.
Kind of helps me talking about it, letting it percolate up. Allows me to kind of reflect on what books had the biggest impact.
Well, I know.
1984. Mate. If no one's read that, fuck me. That there's parts in that book where you're going, how did this guy know?
Well, so now you know more than me. But by the way, I don't think you've come with I've told you before we started, and you've pumped out like I'm tracking about eight book recommendations off the bat. Just quickly, Nassim Taleb, I think excellent. Really does break down your current perceptions of the world and sort of motivates you to go out and search for more. Dave Grossman, he's just written recently, maybe a year and a half ago now, a book about the psychological impacts of video games. It didn't take off as much as his other ones because it's a big industry. Video game. I think the biggest video game, GTA 5, the year it was released, made more money than the entire music industry made, which
it's
puts
unbelievable.
me on to the next topic as well. And then obviously, 1984, George Orwell, good friends with Winston Churchill. Hey, Russia was doing what he writes about in the book. So who knows what he knew back then? Maybe it was going on at the time.
Yeah, brilliant writer. And if you've got a chance, he's an author that is absolutely worth diving deeper into his early pamphlets and writings around. What was his book? Welcome to Catalonia. I can't remember now. It's been so long, but I just remember being smitten with his ideas and it's bullshit. All this, he's a bloody Marxist and a socialist and a communist and all. It's just complete garbage. He was ultimately a forlorn, sorry figure, who just loved writing but had some amazing ideas. And he was a journalist at heart. He went off and fought in wars. He went off and fought. He was shot through the throat, I think, in the Spanish War, but wrote the whole time around and was a journalist. Now, I got a lot of respect for that kind of life, I think, for people who are willing not to just sit back like a Hemingway and kind of have a few yarns here and there. And I'm sure he got got close to the front whenever he could. But for people who actually got out and got into it, there's a different gravitas around when they write, I think. It really strikes me.
Well, I think I think there's a lot of like you said, there's a lot of really great authors that start off that way. Maybe you're looking at one in the camera, mate. When you look at yourself, I know you're too humble, but I think you might be one of those people as well now. If you were to sit and reflect on it, obviously after what you've gone through and now writing, and I think you're right. I know Winston Churchill was doing the same thing in war zones before he came a leader. Now, obviously, he's not an author, but he's had a lot of books written about him. George Orwell. And I just interviewed, Matthew Williams, who's just gone. He's just gone back to Ukraine to continue his journalism as a passion. And I believe he's going to be writing a book soon, hopefully as well. So there's one to watch out for. And I think a lot of people would read that. Now, Harry, we talk about cricket. We talk about having, a third thing. You've got where you spend most of your time, which is your workplace, whether it's defense or otherwise. You've got your family that's with you. And for yourself, you've got cricket. But you also have music, mate. And now, do you want to talk us through the band? And you've been in the band for years and years. How did it start? What is it, and what are you guys doing now?
1990, the Externals. We pinched the name from what used to be our secret squirrel, kind of out of uniform component of the unit, or what the units. I shouldn't say we anymore, should I? And they were called the Externals. It was a shit name, but we thought it was cool. When at that stage, we thought we'd be going for about 2 nights. But back then, for the majority of the 90s and early 2000s, it was just guys from Perth, and we played big days out. We recorded, I think, up until mid 2000s, 5 albums. Good, I think, pretty decent stuff too, if I do say so myself. We played big day out. We played, a whole bunch of shows with some decent bands and whatnot, and we loved it. It was just an escape, I guess. It was a bit of a way to kill some time to start with. It kind of got big on us. And so we've been together 30 years now. We've had civilians and military guys in the band. I reckon it'd be the greatest party ever because we ran a strict no dickheads policy, except for me. Obviously, I got through. But we had a lovely group of men that were all contributed to the band over that time. And I love it, mate. Whenever, one thing I love about the band is whenever we meet, we hug. we love each other. We can look each other in the eyes without quivering, and it's just it really is a beautiful thing. And we played recently with the Cosmic Psychos up at Leichhardt or in near Balmain there, to some pretty big rooms, which was great to be back playing live. And we want to play some more. It's really about time for us. I think at the moment we all work full time. Two of us are still, there's still two veterans, myself and Matt Stevens, who's a bass player, and then we've got Tom, Dave, and Nick, who the rest. The other three make up the five, and we love travelling together. But we're all full-time workers, so we'll probably play, I reckon, 3 to 4 shows a year. In October this year, I think we're tracking a West Australia mini tour, which will be Perth, then down to Margs and beyond. We've got a pretty reasonable following down there, full of old people. So look, mate, we still rock. I think we played the show. We played the show with Cosmic Psychos, and it was heaving. It was good. I was really buoyed by the fact that we went hard and played some hard punk rock music.
I think like the rest of our conversations and the rest of your interests, and I'm sure you've got heaps more interests and passions as well that you've got in your life, that aren't mentioned in the book. But mate, I think this chat is brilliant because it just shows as far as a military career goes, you're in one of the highest tempo units. You're studying psychology on the side. You've got a family with 2 children. Is that correct? 2 children.
Yep, Henry and Georgia.
Yeah. And so you're studying, and then you're playing rock and roll on the side. I know you're a big surfer as well, but I just think you're a testament of what you do speak about with having these extra things in your life. And if Harry's not busy, like too busy to go and explore all these different things amongst 11 different deployments and a shit ton of backyard cricket, then I think I'm not going to leave this conversation and find an excuse to say I'm too busy for at least the next couple of weeks, mate. So I just
but what you're doing, Dylan, is amazing. And I think before we do wrap it up, I said it to you earlier, but congratulations on what you're doing. I think Brothers and Books and the attitude of it as well. I spoke to you before about this kind of the traditional ESO community is just trapped in this never-ending fundraising and financially justifying mindset, and it repulses me a little bit, But what you're doing is along with a range of others, has got this kind of startup fresh feel. It's about empowering people and rolling your sleeves up and actually getting in and doing the work, and the pop-ups and the full. I don't know how many libraries you've put out there now, including the ones that have probably been and gone, and all the rest of it. It's amazing, and there's just I talk about this with footy, with elite sports and corporates, etc. If you really want to get some extra juice out of the lemon, you can go and do harder training and mental skills training and social, get more socially connected. But reading is such a lightweight, easy way to get performance improvement. Ordering your thoughts, opening your mind to new ideas is an exercise in situational and self-awareness, zooming out. It's like we go through life and we can probably only see that much. And when you start to read in particular and write, I think the lens opens up significantly. And I think there's a real power in that. And in a world where everyone's shrinking down into bloody, that what's in front of the meter in front of them, I think it's actually an edge now. It's no longer just something to enjoy. And one thing talking about reading, I love it, right? I love reading. I get really passionate about it. And I'm shocking. I'll have 10 books going at once. If you go up and beside my bed, I've got a stack, and they've all got a little card in wherever I'm up to. And I'll go to bed and I'll go, you know what? I don't feel like reading tonight, or I don't feel like reading that. I feel like I should. I told someone I would, but I really feel like reading that, and I'll just pick it up and continue. So I might just kind of flit around, a whole bunch of different books, because it's not only about retaining the information. If you're reading books to try and retain information, so I've got to remember about the parasympathetic nervous system and how did that go again, you won't. You need to keep revisiting and revisiting and revisiting, because we don't remember a great deal. Humans are not good at remembering things verboten. So if you've got some people are better than others, but what you should do is be reading for pleasure, so that you're releasing dopamine and serotonin or whatever the feel good chemicals, so you feel good. And if that is about the parasympathetic nerves, just read it. Don't try and commit it to memory. Make some notes on the side. Just enjoy reading for reading's sake, because it's a bit like when you go to kick the footy at the Oval. It just feels good, and you go for a run. I think that's where you should be at. And then as you get better at it over time, you can start to take on some more disciplined reading, like a Great Expectations, and go, okay, I'm going to try and get this out this year, or this 6 months, or this 3 months, or however long you give yourself. And that's a book that you need to almost learn a new language. Shakespeare, you've got to learn a whole new language to get through that. That is punishing. Absolutely. Don't let anyone tell you Shakespeare's enjoyable to read. That's the jiu-jitsu of bloody reading. But if that's the level you can get to, fantastic.
Harry, I got to say thanks, because I appreciate obviously that sentiment, but truly, mate, it's people like yourself that that are mentors to a lot of people, that a lot of people look up to, coming through and just revisiting the mission and clarifying the importance of reading, mate, because you truly do make it cool to read. It's very hard to argue with someone like yourself, not only because you're in a rock band, but also the over 20 years of military service, seeing a lot of combat deployments, telling people to read books. It's very hard to argue with that. I know my father's quite conservative, and be like, oh, what are you reading for? But if you would have a beer with him, I'm sure he'd pick up Great Expectations the next day. And I can't agree enough with what you say about reading. And I laugh when you mention Shakespeare, because that's the book that the education system prescribes to all these young men and women everywhere to read Shakespeare is beyond me, absolutely beyond me, to expect someone in year 10 to pick up Shakespeare and enjoy it. I actually think that's where a lot of people's hesitancy to read comes from, reading bloody books like that.
I think access to something like Shakespeare probably starts with going to see some theatre and having a deeper appreciation and getting an attachment to a character. But hard to pick up Shakespeare's complete works and start chewing through that and setting yourself a mission to read it. But having said that, there's some great prose and poetry. So some people have done the hard work for you with Shakespeare, and they've broken little pamphlet-sized books out, and they bring you the most romantic or most emotional parts or memorable parts of Shakespeare. So we should never throw it away, because the guy's a genius.
Yeah, he's a genius.
But bloody hard work. I remember, was it Ken Robinson talking about Shakespeare? He would have been a punishing kid. Stop talking like that, Shakespeare. What are you saying? Oh, piss off. Just like he would have, but just a complete genius.
Harry, thank you so much for coming on today, mate. For shedding light on some of what you talked about in your book. Obviously, with your myriad of backgrounds, interests, and passions, I think a lot of people will be interested into what you have to say. Obviously, I know I am, and I know your consultancy company continues to hopefully shape and affect other businesses. So thank you so much for coming on Brothers and Books and assisting me try and make reading cool.
Brilliant, mate. My pleasure. Thanks, Dylan.
All right. Cheers, Harry.